Officer James Sullivan had been with the Texas State Highway Patrol for 15 years, and in all that time, he'd never questioned an order from his superior. But as he stood on the shoulder of Interstate 35 at 2 in the morning, watching Captain Raymond Briggs conduct what could only be described as a shakedown, that unblemished record was about to end. Come on," Briggs muttered into his radio, his cruiser's lights painting the empty highway in alternating red and blue. "Where the hell is my backup?" James shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on his duty belt. 20 minutes earlier, Briggs had pulled over a semi-truck for what he claimed was a broken taillight, a taillight that appeared perfectly functional to James. Now the driver, a tired-looking man in his 50s, stood beside his rig while Briggs conducted an increasingly aggressive inspection. "Sir, is there a problem?" James finally asked. Briggs shot him a look that could freeze gasoline. "Yeah, Sullivan, there's a problem. This driver's hauling commercial goods across state lines, and his manifest doesn't match his cargo. That's a federal violation." The truck driver, whose name tag read Robert Hayes, shook his head vigorously. "Officer, I swear, everything's in order. I've been running this route for 20 years. My paperwork is." "Your paperwork is garbage," Briggs snapped. "You're looking at impoundment of your vehicle, criminal charges, and possibly losing your CDL. Unless—" James felt his stomach drop. He'd heard rumors about Briggs, whispers in the break room that died the moment the captain walked in. Stories about traffic stops that ended with cash changing hands and citations mysteriously disappearing. "Unless what?" Robert asked, his voice cracking with desperation. "Unless we can work something out," Briggs said smoothly. "See, I've got discretion in cases like these. I could write you up for everything. That's about $5,000 in fines, plus the impound fees, plus your truck sitting in a lot for 3 months while the investigation plays out. Or you could pay me $2,000 right now, and I'll overlook the discrepancies." James stepped forward. "Captain, maybe we should." "Sullivan, secure the perimeter," Briggs ordered without looking at him. The empty highway stretched out under the dim glow of the streetlights, with the occasional car passing by, unaware of the tense situation unfolding. "Make sure no civilians interfere." It wasn't a request. It was a command designed to get James out of earshot. But James didn't move. Instead, he activated the body camera on his vest, a camera that Briggs had ordered him to turn off at the start of the shift. "Captain, I really think we should call this into dispatch," James said carefully. "Get a supervisor out here to review the manifest." Briggs's head snapped around, his eyes narrowing. "What did you just say?" "I said we should call it in. Standard procedure for cargo discrepancies." For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic on the interstate and the idling of the semi's engine. Then Briggs smiled, a cold, dangerous expression that made James's hand drift toward his sidearm. "Sullivan, you've got 2 choices. You can walk back to your vehicle and wait there like I ordered, or you can join this driver in the back of my cruiser for obstruction. What's it going to be?" Before James could answer, headlights appeared in the distance. A silver sedan was approaching from the south, traveling at a moderate speed. As it drew closer, James could see it was a rental car with an Enterprise sticker in the rear window. "Perfect timing," Briggs muttered. He stepped into the road, hand raised, and the sedan slowed to a stop. The driver was a woman in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She rolled down her window, her expression one of polite concern. "Is everything okay, officer?" "License and registration," Briggs demanded. She handed them over without argument. Briggs examined them with his flashlight, his expression growing increasingly annoyed. "Dr. Elena Vasquez," he read aloud. "Dallas address." "What are you doing out here at this hour, doctor?" "Driving back from a medical conference in San Antonio," Elena replied calmly. "Is there a problem?" Your left brake light is out. That's a safety violation. This is a $200 citation, unless you'd prefer to handle it informally. James had heard enough. He stepped forward, his body camera capturing everything. Captain Briggs, her brake light is functioning properly. I can see it from here. Briggs's face flushed red. Sullivan, I gave you an order. And I'm following procedure, James replied, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. Ma'am, you're free to go. There's no violation here. Elena looked between the two officers, clearly sensing the tension. But instead of driving away, she put her car in park and stepped out. Actually, I think I'll stay, she said quietly. I'm a physician, and I'm also a member of the Texas Civil Rights Coalition. What I've witnessed in the last 60 seconds suggests this isn't a routine traffic stop. Briggs's hand moved to his weapon. Doctor, get back in your vehicle right now, or I'll cite you for obstruction. I'm standing on public property, observing public officials performing their duties, Elena countered. That's protected by the First Amendment. And that camera on Officer Sullivan's vest is recording everything, isn't it? James nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am, it is. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Robert, the truck driver, was watching with wide eyes. Elena stood her ground beside her rental car, and Captain Briggs looked like a cornered animal, dangerous and unpredictable. All right, Briggs said softly, his voice taking on a calculated quality that made James's skin crawl. All right, Sullivan, you want to be a hero? Fine. Let's see how that works out for you. Doctor, Mr. Hayes, you're both under arrest for obstruction of justice. Sullivan, since you're so concerned with procedure, you can cuff them and transport them to county lockup. On what grounds? James demanded. On my grounds, Briggs snapped. I'm a 20-year veteran of this department, and you're a patrol officer who's about to be written up for insubordination. Now follow orders, or join them in handcuffs. James looked at Elena, then at Robert, then back at his captain. This was the moment that would define his career, maybe his entire life. He could follow orders, look the other way, and remain part of a corrupt system. Or he could do what he'd sworn an oath to do: protect and serve. He reached for his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 7-4 requesting immediate supervisor response to my location. 35, mile marker 114. We have a situation that requires command-level oversight. Briggs lunged forward and grabbed the radio from James's shoulder, ripping it free. You just ended your career, Sullivan. Maybe, James replied, but I won't end it as a corrupt cop. What happened next occurred in a blur of motion. Briggs shoved James backward, reaching for a service weapon. James, trained in defensive tactics, blocked the move and swept Briggs's legs, bringing the captain down hard onto the asphalt. The two men grappled, Briggs trying to reach his gun while James fought to control the situation without escalating to lethal force. Elena was already on her cell phone. 911, I need to report an assault by a police officer on Interstate 35, mile marker 114. An officer is being attacked by his superior. Robert, the truck driver, had been frozen in shock, but now he jumped into action. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from his truck and stood ready, though clearly uncertain whether to intervene. Don't move, Briggs roared, finally breaking free from James and drawing his weapon. He pointed it directly at James's chest. I will shoot you for assaulting a superior officer. James raised his hand slowly, his body camera still recording everything. Captain, you need to put the weapon down. You're on camera. Multiple witnesses. This doesn't end well for you. It ends however I say it ends, Briggs snarled. His hand was shaking, his finger on the trigger. In that moment, James realized his captain had crossed a line from which there was no return. James looked at Elena, then at Robert, then back at his captain. This was the moment that would define his career, maybe his entire life. He could follow orders, look the other way, and remain part of a corrupt system. Or he could do what he'd sworn an oath to do: protect and serve. James raised his hand slowly, his body camera still recording everything. In that moment, James realized his captain had crossed a line from which there was no return. Briggs had built an empire of corruption on this stretch of highway, and he'd do anything to protect it. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, multiple units by the sound of it. Briggs's eyes darted toward the approaching lights, then back to James. "You called them before we even got here, didn't you? You've been investigating me." "No, sir," James said honestly. "But I should have. I should have reported the rumors months ago. I should have trusted my instincts. I chose loyalty over integrity, and that was wrong." The first police cruiser skidded to a stop, followed by two more. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, shouting commands that overlapped into chaos. "Drop the weapon. Police. Captain Briggs, lower your firearm. Everybody on the ground." A Lieutenant James recognized, Linda Reeves, from Internal Affairs, stepped forward with her hands raised. "Ray, put the gun down. It's over." "Over?" Briggs laughed, a wild, desperate sound. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. Do you know how much money moves through this corridor? How many people pay to keep their trucks rolling, their businesses operating without problems? I'm not the bad guy here. I'm the one who makes things work." By extorting honest people, Elena called out, her phone still recording. By threatening livelihoods and abusing your authority. That's not making things work, Captain. That's called racketeering. Lieutenant Reeves took another step closer. "Ray, I've been building a case against you for 8 months. We have testimony from 47 victims, documentation of over $300,000 in illegal payments, and evidence of conspiracy with 3 other officers in your unit. Officer Sullivan's body camera footage tonight is just the final piece. It's done." The gun wavered in Briggs's hand. For a moment, James thought he might actually lower it. Then Briggs's expression hardened, and James saw the man make his decision. "If I'm going down, I'm not going down alone," Briggs said. He swung the weapon toward Elena. James didn't think. He launched himself at his captain, covering the 10 feet between them in a desperate lunge. The gun fired, the shot deafening in the night air. James felt a burning sensation along his ribs, but didn't stop. He collided with Briggs, driving him backward into the side of the cruiser. Other officers swarmed in, pulling Briggs away, wresting the weapon from his grip. James collapsed onto the pavement, his hand pressed against his side, where blood was seeping through his uniform shirt. Elena was beside him instantly, her physician training taking over. "Lie still. You're hit, but it looks like it just grazed you. You're going to be fine." Lieutenant Reeves knelt on his other side. "Sullivan, you just saved a civilian's life and stopped a dirty cop. You're a hero." "I'm not a hero," James gasped. "I should have stopped him months ago. I knew something was wrong, and I did nothing." "But you did something tonight," Elena said firmly, applying pressure to his wound with a cloth someone had handed her. "You did something when it counted. That's what matters." Paramedics arrived and took over Elena's care. As they loaded James into the ambulance, he could see Captain Raymond Briggs being placed in handcuffs and stuffed into the back of a patrol car. The man who'd once commanded respect and fear was now just another criminal being transported to county lockup. Robert Hayes, the truck driver, approached before the ambulance doors closed. "Officer, I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't stood up for me." "You don't need to thank me," James interrupted. "I was just doing my job. The job I should have been doing all along." The following weeks were a whirlwind. James spent 3 days in the hospital recovering from what turned out to be a relatively minor gunshot wound. Painful, but not life-threatening. During that time, the investigation into Captain Briggs and his corruption network exploded into one of the largest police corruption cases in Texas history. Lieutenant Reeves and her team from Internal Affairs had been working undercover for months, gathering evidence against Briggs and 3 other officers in his unit. They'd identified a systematic pattern of extortion targeting truck drivers, documented bribes paid to make citations disappear, and uncovered evidence that Briggs had been funneling protection money to several members of organized crime. In exchange for information on high-value targets to shake down. The body camera footage from James's vest became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. It showed everything: Briggs's initial shakedown of Robert Hayes, his attempt to extort Elena Vasquez, and most damning of all, his assault on a fellow officer and attempted murder of a civilian. Elena Vasquez, true to her word about being a member of the Texas Civil Rights Coalition, became a vocal advocate for police reform. She testified before the state legislature, sharing her experience and calling for mandatory body cameras, civilian oversight boards, and enhanced protections for whistleblowers within law enforcement. Robert Hayes, the truck driver who'd nearly been victimized that night, received $75,000 in compensation from the state and a formal apology from the Texas Department of Public Safety. More importantly, his testimony helped identify 17 other drivers who'd been extorted by Briggs over the years. Many of them received compensation and had false citations removed from their records. James Sullivan became, somewhat reluctantly, the face of police integrity. He was promoted to detective and assigned to a new task force specifically created to investigate police corruption. He also became a regular speaker at police academies, sharing his story and emphasizing the importance of speaking up when witnessing misconduct. The blue wall of silence is real, he would tell rooms full of recruits. The pressure to protect your fellow officers, even when they're wrong, is intense. But that wall doesn't protect good cops, it protects bad ones. And every time we stay silent, we become complicit in the corruption that destroys public trust and endangers the communities we've sworn to serve. Captain Raymond Briggs went to trial 8 months after his arrest. The evidence against him was overwhelming: testimony from victims, forensic accounting showing hundreds of thousands in illegal payments, and the damning body camera footage that captured him attempting to extort civilians and shoot a fellow officer. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: extortion, bribery, assault on a peace officer, attempted murder, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The federal charges alone carried a potential sentence of life in prison. At sentencing, the judge, a stern woman named Margaret Chen who'd spent 30 years on the bench, addressed Briggs with barely controlled fury. "Captain Briggs, you were entrusted with extraordinary power and authority. You wore a badge that represented the law, justice, and the protection of innocent citizens. Instead, you used that power to prey on the vulnerable, to extort honest people, and to corrupt the very institution you were supposed to serve. Your actions haven't just harmed your victims, though that harm is substantial and real. You've damaged the reputation of every honest police officer in this state. You've eroded public trust that takes decades to build and mere moments to destroy. You've betrayed your oath, your colleagues, and your community." In the most fundamental way possible, Judge Chen sentenced Briggs to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in applause, a rare occurrence that the judge didn't silence. 3 years after that night on Interstate 35, James Sullivan sat in a coffee shop in downtown Austin with Elena Vasquez. They'd stayed in touch after the incident, forming an unlikely friendship built on shared trauma and a commitment to making positive change. "I saw your interview on 60 Minutes," Elena said, stirring sugar into her latte. You did good, James. Really good. He shrugged, uncomfortable with praise as always. I just told the truth. Briggs and officers like him are the exception, not the rule. Most cops are good people trying to do a difficult job. But we can't pretend the exceptions don't exist. That's exactly the message people need to hear, Elena replied. Not all cops are bad or all cops are heroes, just honest acknowledgement that the system has problems and we need to fix them. James's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled. Speak of the devil. That's Robert Hayes. His son just graduated from the police academy. Top of his class. You're kidding, Elena said, her eyes widening. After everything that happened? Because of everything that happened, James corrected. Robert told me his son watched the whole thing unfold. Saw his dad being extorted. Saw me stand up to a corrupt superior. Saw the system eventually work the way it's supposed to. The kid decided he wanted to be part of the solution. He wants to be the kind of cop that people can trust. Elena raised her coffee cup. To being part of the solution. James clinked his cup against hers. To being part of the solution. As they sat in that coffee shop, discussing reforms and sharing stories, neither of them noticed the young man in a police academy t-shirt sitting 2 tables over, listening intently to their conversation. His name was David Hayes, and he was Robert's son. In 6 months, he'd be assigned to a patrol unit on Interstate 35. But unlike Captain Raymond Briggs, David Hayes would patrol that stretch of highway with integrity, honor, and a commitment to serving rather than exploiting the people who traveled it. He'd been given a template for what a good cop looked like, and he intended to follow it. Because corruption doesn't end with a single arrest or a single sentence. It ends when good people refuse to stay silent, when broken systems get reformed, and when the next generation learns from the mistakes of the past. The fight for integrity in law enforcement would continue long after Briggs's prison cell door clanged shut. But as long as there were officers like James Sullivan willing to risk everything for what was right, citizens like Elena Vasquez brave enough to speak truth to power, and young recruits like David Hayes inspired to serve with honor, there was hope.